Marcus Washington sits in his first-class seat, watching security escort him off the plane while privileged passengers whisper and record. 7 minutes later, the captain's voice crackles over the intercom with an announcement that will change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. What happens next destroys careers forever. Before we dive into this incredible story that will leave you speechless, I want to know where my amazing viewers are watching from today. Drop your city in the comments below. Smash that like button if you're ready for a story that will restore your faith in justice. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, because stories like this remind us why we fight for what's right. You won't believe how this seemingly ordinary flight turned into a moment that changed an entire industry. Let's get started. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport as Marcus Washington adjusted his Navy Armani suit jacket and checked his boarding pass one final time. At 26 years old, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from years of excellence in every endeavor he pursued. His father's company, Washington Industries, had sent him to Atlanta for a crucial board meeting that could determine the future of their newest acquisition. Flight 447 to Atlanta represented just another business trip in Marcus's carefully planned life. He had earned his MBA from Harvard, spent 2 years at Goldman Sachs, and now served as his father's strategic advisor on major corporate decisions. The first-class ticket in his hand, Seat 2A, was purchased through the company's premium corporate travel account, just as it had been dozens of times before. As Marcus approached Gate B12, he noticed the usual mix of business travelers and families. Preparing for the 2-hour flight south, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant Sarah Chen, reminding him about the presentation materials in his briefcase and wishing him luck with the board meeting. Everything seemed perfectly routine until he stepped aboard the aircraft. Flight attendant Jennifer Collins, a 15-year veteran with perfectly styled blonde hair and a practiced smile, stood at the entrance greeting passengers. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly when Marcus handed her his boarding pass. The change was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had experienced similar moments throughout his life. "I'm sorry, but I need to see this again," Collins said, holding Marcus's boarding pass up to the light as if examining currency for authenticity. Her voice carried just enough volume to draw attention from nearby passengers settling into their seats. Marcus maintained his composure, though he felt the familiar knot forming in his stomach. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Collins studied the boarding pass with exaggerated scrutiny, then glanced at her passenger manifest. "We've had some computer issues today. Let me just verify this with the gate agent." Behind Marcus, passengers began forming a line, and he could feel their eyes upon him. A businessman in an expensive watch tapped his foot impatiently while checking his own phone. A young mother with 2 children shifted restlessly, clearly eager to find their seats and get settled. "Sir, I really need you to step aside while I confirm this," Collins insisted, her tone growing more authoritative. That's when Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton made her entrance. At 73 years old, she moved with the entitled authority of someone accustomed to having the world rearrange itself around her preferences. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her pearls gleamed against her pale blue cardigan, and her voice carried the crisp diction of old money. "Excuse me, dear," Mrs. Pemberton addressed Collins while completely ignoring Marcus's presence. "I believe there's been some sort of mistake with my seating arrangement. I always sit in 2A when I fly this route. My late husband and I have been using that seat for 37 years. Collins immediately transformed, her practiced customer service smile becoming genuinely warm and apologetic. "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Pemberton. I'm so terribly sorry about this confusion. There must have been a computer error in our system. Please, don't worry. We'll have this sorted out right away." Marcus watched this exchange with growing disbelief. His boarding pass clearly showed Seat 2A, purchased and confirmed weeks in advance. Yet Collins was treating Mrs. Pemberton's complaint as if it took precedence over documented reservations and paid tickets. "I don't understand," Marcus interjected politely. "My ticket shows Seat 2A, and I made this reservation 3 weeks ago through our corporate travel department." Collins turned to him with barely concealed irritation. "Sir, as I explained, we're having system issues today. I need you to take a seat in economy while we sort this out. I'm sure we can find you something comfortable back there." The word back there hung in the air like a slap. Marcus had heard that tone before, the subtle condescension that suggested he didn't belong in the front of the plane. Other first-class passengers had begun to notice the commotion, and several were reaching for their phones, sensing drama unfolding. "I have a confirmed first-class ticket," Marcus replied, his voice remaining steady despite his growing frustration. "I'm happy to wait while you verify the reservation, but I won't be moving to economy when I've paid for and been assigned this seat." Mrs. Pemberton huffed audibly. "Young man, some of us have been loyal customers of this airline since before you were born. I think you need to learn about showing proper respect to your elders." The racial undertones were unmistakable now, though carefully wrapped in language about age and loyalty. Marcus felt the weight of every passenger's stare, the phones being raised to record what was clearly becoming a confrontation. Collins stepped closer to Marcus, lowering her voice but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing every word. "Sir, I'm trying to handle this situation diplomatically, but if you continue to be difficult, I'll have no choice but to call security. We can resolve this quickly if you just cooperate with our request." "I am cooperating," Marcus replied. "I'm asking you to honor the ticket I purchased and the seat I was assigned. I have my frequent flyer status, my credit card used for the purchase, and my corporate travel authorization. What more verification do you need?" But Collins had already turned away, speaking into her radio to summon assistance. Marcus could hear her describing a situation with a passenger refusing to cooperate with crew instructions and requesting security support. Within minutes, Captain Richard Hayes received the call in the cockpit. A 20-year veteran pilot with an impeccable safety record, Hayes prided himself on running efficient flights with minimal delays. When his senior flight attendant reported a disruptive passenger, he automatically authorized whatever measures were necessary to resolve the situation quickly. Security Officer Tom Bradley emerged from the jet bridge, his imposing 6'3" frame filling the aircraft doorway. At 45 years old, Bradley had worked airport security for 12 years, and his approach to passenger disputes was direct and uncompromising. He sized up the situation in seconds. A well-dressed black man surrounded by uncomfortable white passengers, with his flight attendant clearly requesting assistance. "What seems to be the problem here?" Bradley asked. His question directed solely at Collins while completely ignoring Marcus. "This passenger is refusing to move to his assigned seat in economy and is disrupting other passengers," Collins explained, gesturing toward Marcus as if he were a piece of problematic luggage. Marcus stepped forward. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. I have a valid first-class ticket for seat 2A, but the flight attendant is asking me to move based on another passenger's complaint. I've offered to provide documentation to verify my reservation." Bradley barely glanced at Marcus before responding. "Sir, when the flight crew gives you instructions, you need to follow them immediately. This isn't a debate or a negotiation. Gather your belongings and come with me." The finality in Bradley's voice made it clear that any further discussion would be futile. Marcus looked around the cabin, seeing a mixture of expressions. Some passengers appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others seemed satisfied that the disturbance was being handled, and a few were actively recording the incident on their phones. The walk down the aircraft aisle felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. Every step echoed in the sudden silence that had fallen over the cabin, broken only by the soft clicks of phone cameras capturing his humiliation. He maintained his dignity, keeping his head high and his movements measured. But inside, his heart pounded with a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. Mrs. Pemberton had already settled into seat 2A, accepting Collins's profuse apologies and complimentary champagne with the satisfaction of someone whose sense of natural order had been restored. As Marcus passed her row, she made no effort to lower her voice when speaking to her seatmate. "It's just shocking how some people think they can talk their way into situations they don't belong in," she declared, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "In my day, people knew their place and showed proper respect for their betters." The comment hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he continued walking, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Behind him, He could hear Collins offering Mrs. Pemberton premium snacks and expressing hope that the unpleasantness hadn't ruined her flying experience. Bradley's grip on Marcus's arm was unnecessary and humiliating, broadcasting to every passenger that he was being removed as a security threat rather than a paying customer with a legitimate grievance. The officer seemed to relish the authority his uniform provided, walking with the swagger of someone accustomed to unquestioned compliance. "You know, son," Bradley said as they reached the jet bridge, his tone condescending and paternal, "this could have gone a lot easier if you just accepted the situation gracefully. Sometimes you've got to know when you're beat." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the security officer. "I'm not beaten, and I'm not your son. I'm a paying customer who was removed from his assigned seat based on racial discrimination, and I won't pretend otherwise to make anyone feel more comfortable." Bradley's expression hardened. "Now you listen here, boy. You can play the race card all you want, but what I see is someone trying to scam their way into first class and causing a disturbance when they got caught. You're lucky I don't have you arrested right now." The word boy hung between them like a loaded weapon. Marcus felt 26 years of education, achievement, and careful navigation of racial dynamics crystallize into a moment of absolute clarity. This wasn't about a seating mix-up or computer errors. This was about power, privilege, and the assumption that he didn't belong in spaces reserved for people who looked like Mrs. Pemberton. In the terminal, a small crowd had gathered to watch the commotion. Some travelers paused their own journeys to observe the drama unfolding, while others hurried past, uncomfortable with witnessing what was clearly an ugly situation. Airport Supervisor Janet Morrison arrived on the scene, her crisp uniform and official badge marking her as someone with authority to resolve disputes. Morrison was a 20-year airline industry veteran who had worked her way up through customer service roles to her current position. She prided herself on being able to diffuse tense situations through a combination of corporate policy and practical diplomacy. However, her approach was immediately undermined by her assumption that her staff's version of events was automatically correct. "What seems to be the problem here, Tom?" she asked Bradley, again completely bypassing Marcus as if he were invisible. "Got a passenger here trying to scam his way into first class," Bradley explained. "Flight attendant caught him, but he's being difficult about moving to his real seat. Claims he has documentation, but you know how that goes." Morrison nodded knowingly, as if she had dealt with dozens of similar situations. "Sir," she finally addressed Marcus, "I understand you're frustrated, but creating a scene won't help your situation. Why don't you show me what documentation you have and we'll see what we can work out." Marcus retrieved his boarding pass, driver's license, and the credit card he had used to purchase the ticket. He also pulled out his phone to show the confirmation email from the airline and his frequent flyer account details showing his premium status. Morrison examined each item with theatrical thoroughness, holding them up to the light and comparing information as if she were a forensic accountant investigating fraud. Her performance was clearly intended to demonstrate to onlookers that she was being thorough and fair, but her body language and facial expressions conveyed skepticism about everything Marcus presented. "Well, this all looks very professional," Morrison said finally, her tone suggesting that professional appearance was somehow suspicious. "But we've been having problems with sophisticated fraud lately. These documents could easily be fabricated." Marcus felt his composure beginning to crack. "Are you seriously suggesting that I forged airline tickets and credit cards to scam my way into a first-class seat? Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds?" "Sir, there's no need to raise your voice," Morrison replied, though Marcus had not raised his voice at all. "I'm just doing my job, which includes protecting our airline from fraudulent activity. If these documents are legitimate, then our verification process will confirm that." Bradley chimed in with his own observations. "The way I see it, if everything was legitimate, why would the flight attendant have called security in the first place? Jennifer Collins has been with this airline for 15 years. She knows how to spot trouble." As they spoke, Marcus became increasingly aware that their conversation was being conducted in full view and hearing of other passengers. Some had stopped to listen, creating an impromptu audience for his humiliation. He noticed a few people taking photos or videos, and he wondered how long it would be before his degradation became entertainment on social media. Sarah Chen answered on the first ring when Marcus called her. His assistant was accustomed to handling travel emergencies, but the strain in Marcus's voice immediately put her on high alert. "Sarah, I need you to contact our corporate travel department right away," Marcus explained, keeping his voice level despite his frustration. "I'm at O'Hare, and there's been some kind of problem with my ticket. The airline is claiming there might be fraud involved." "Fraud?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief. "Marcus, that ticket was booked through our premium corporate account 3 weeks ago. I have all the confirmation numbers and receipts. What on earth is going on?" "I'll explain everything later," Marcus replied. "Right now, I just need you to call the airline and verify the purchase. The flight attendant had me removed from my seat and security escorted me off the plane." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Sarah responded. "They removed you from the plane? Marcus, this sounds like discrimination. I'm calling our legal department right after I contact the airline." As Marcus ended the call, he could hear Morrison and Bradley discussing his situation in voices just loud enough for him to overhear. Their conversation was peppered with coded language that any Black American would recognize immediately. References to "these people" and "that type," and questions about whether someone like him could really afford first-class travel. Other passengers from Flight 447 began appearing in the terminal, some having witnessed the entire incident, and others having heard second-hand accounts. Marcus noticed the mixed reactions. A few people approached him with expressions of sympathy or offers of support, while others gave him disapproving looks or made sure to give him a wide berth. One passenger, a middle-aged white businessman, stopped to speak with Morrison. "I just wanted you to know that I saw the whole thing," he said. That young man was completely polite and reasonable. He never raised his voice or acted threatening in any way. "Honestly, I thought the flight attendant was out of line." Morrison thanked him for his input but made it clear that her staff's assessment of the situation was what mattered. "We appreciate your concern, but our employees are trained to handle these situations appropriately. Sometimes what passengers perceive as reasonable behavior looks different from a crew member's perspective." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. Even when presented with eyewitness testimony supporting his version of events, the airline officials seemed determined to protect their narrative of a disruptive passenger who had been properly handled according to protocol. The security cameras positioned throughout the terminal were capturing every moment of this interaction, recording not just the immediate confrontation, but also the broader context of how Marcus was being treated compared to other passengers in similar situations. He made mental notes about camera positions and witness locations, already thinking ahead to potential legal action. Airport operations seemed to continue normally around them, but Marcus could feel the weight of curious stares and whispered conversations. His situation had become a spectacle, entertainment for travelers dealing with their own delays and frustrations. The irony wasn't lost on him that his humiliation was probably the most interesting thing that had happened in this terminal all day. Sarah Chen's fingers flew across her keyboard as she pulled up Washington Industries' corporate travel account. As Marcus's executive assistant for 3 years, she had booked hundreds of flights for company executives, and she knew their travel protocols better than anyone. What she discovered in the reservation system made her blood boil. Marcus's ticket had been purchased 21 days earlier using the company's Platinum corporate account, which provided automatic upgrades and premium service guarantees. The confirmation showed seat 2A had been assigned at the time of booking, not as a last-minute upgrade or system error. Sarah immediately screenshotted every relevant document and began preparing a comprehensive file. Travel coordinator Lisa Park answered Sarah's call on the second ring. As the person responsible for managing all executive travel for Washington Industries, Park had established relationships with airline executives across the industry. When Sarah explained the situation, Park's professional demeanor shifted to barely controlled fury. "Are you telling me they removed Marcus Washington from a flight for seat fraud?" Park's voice carried the authority of someone who spent millions of dollars annually on corporate travel. "Sarah, that ticket was purchased with our premier corporate account. There's no question about its legitimacy." Park immediately accessed the airline's executive customer service line, a number reserved for high-volume corporate accounts. Within minutes, She was connected to Director of Corporate Relations Michelle Torres, who handled disputes involving the airline's most valuable business customers. "Michelle, we have a serious problem," Park began, her tone professional but unmistakably threatening. "One of our executives, Marcus Washington, was just removed from Flight 447 to Atlanta. Your staff is claiming his first-class ticket might be fraudulent, which is not only insulting but potentially discriminatory." Torres pulled up the reservation in real time, her silence stretching as she reviewed the details. "Lisa, I'm seeing the ticket in our system, purchased through your corporate account with full first-class confirmation. Let me get someone on site immediately to resolve this situation." Meanwhile, the incident was taking on a life of its own in the digital sphere. Passenger Jennifer Kim, a marketing executive who had witnessed the entire confrontation, posted a detailed Twitter thread describing what she had observed. Her account, which had 50,000 followers, described Marcus as impeccably dressed and incredibly polite, while characterizing the flight attendant's behavior as obviously discriminatory. Kim's thread included carefully cropped photos that showed Marcus's dignified demeanor contrasted with the aggressive posturing of security personnel. Within an hour, her posts had been retweeted thousands of times, with hashtags like "Flying While Black" and like "Airline Discrimination" beginning to trend. News reporter Amanda Foster monitored social media feeds as part of her daily routine, looking for stories that might warrant television coverage. When she saw the Washington name trending alongside discrimination allegations, she immediately began investigating the connection to Washington Industries, one of Chicago's most prominent Black-owned businesses. Foster's research revealed that William Washington, Marcus's father, was not just any successful businessman, but one of the most influential African-American executives in the Midwest. His company employed over 5,000 people, and his philanthropic work had supported dozens of civil rights organizations. This wasn't just a story about airline discrimination. It was about the treatment of one of America's most prominent Black families. Back at O'Hare, Marcus continued waiting in the customer service office while Morrison and Bradley maintained their positions that proper protocols had been followed. The arrival of other passengers from Flight 447 began to complicate their narrative, however, as multiple witnesses offered accounts that contradicted the official version of events. Gate agent David Kumar had witnessed the entire incident from his position at the boarding counter. A 10-year airline employee with an exemplary record, Kumar recognized Marcus immediately from business magazines and realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. He quietly began documenting everything he had observed, knowing that his testimony might be crucial in any subsequent investigation. Kumar approached Morrison discreetly, requesting a private conversation. "Janet, I need to tell you something about what I saw on that plane. That passenger, Marcus Washington. He's the son of William Washington from Washington Industries, and what I witnessed doesn't match what's being reported." Morrison's face went pale as the implications began to sink in. Washington Industries was not only a major corporate customer, but also a company with significant political and social influence. If Marcus Washington had indeed been subjected to racial discrimination, the consequences could be catastrophic for everyone involved. "What exactly did you see, David?" Morrison asked, her previous confidence beginning to crumble. "The passenger was completely calm and cooperative," Kumar explained. "He showed his boarding pass, offered additional documentation, and never raised his voice or made any threatening gestures. Jennifer Collins seemed to have decided from the moment she saw him that he didn't belong in first class." As Kumar spoke, Morrison's radio crackled with an urgent message from Airport Operations Manager Steve Roberts. Corporate headquarters had begun receiving calls about social media posts describing a discrimination incident involving Flight 447. The story was spreading rapidly online, and senior executives were demanding immediate answers. Roberts arrived at the customer service office within minutes, his usually composed demeanor replaced by barely concealed panic. A 25-year airline veteran, he had navigated numerous crises, but he immediately recognized this situation as potentially career-ending for everyone involved. "Janet, what the hell is going on down here?" Roberts demanded. "I've got the CEO's office calling about discrimination allegations, and social media is lighting up with posts about our staff." Before Morrison could respond, her phone rang with a call from Michelle Torres in corporate customer relations. Torres's voice carried the kind of urgency reserved for major emergencies. "Janet, I need you to listen very carefully," Torres began. "The passenger you're dealing with is Marcus Washington, son of William Washington, who runs one of our largest corporate accounts. His assistant has contacted us with documentation proving the ticket is completely legitimate. You need to resolve this situation immediately and professionally." Morrison felt her stomach drop as the full scope of her mistake became clear. Not only had she wrongly accused a legitimate passenger of fraud, but she had done so to the son of one of the airline's most important customers, and the entire incident had been witnessed and recorded by multiple passengers. In Atlanta, William Washington was reviewing presentation materials for his board meeting when Sarah's call came through. As one of the most successful black executives in America, William had faced his share of discrimination throughout his career, but he had hoped his son might be spared some of those experiences. Sarah's description of events filled him with a familiar mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Mr. Washington, I think this goes beyond just a customer service issue," Sarah explained. "Based on what Marcus described, this appears to be clear racial discrimination. The flight attendant targeted him from the moment she saw him, and security treated him like a criminal." William immediately contacted his legal team, instructing them to begin documenting everything related to the incident. He also placed calls to several board members, explaining that he might need to delay the meeting depending on how the situation developed. The airline's crisis management team convened an emergency meeting as reports continued flowing in about the escalating situation. Social media monitoring showed the story gaining momentum across multiple platforms, with civil rights organizations beginning to take notice and call for investigations. Legal department reviews revealed that the airline had recently settled several discrimination cases, and any pattern of bias could expose them to significant federal scrutiny. The combination of a high-profile victim, clear documentation of legitimate travel, and widespread social media coverage created exactly the kind of situation that could result in devastating financial and reputational damage. As corporate executives analyzed the situation, they realized they were facing a perfect storm. A discrimination incident involving a prominent family, recorded by multiple witnesses, spreading rapidly online, and involving staff members who appeared to have clear biases. The next few hours would determine whether this remained a containable customer service issue or exploded into a national scandal that could permanently damage the airline's reputation. What do you think should happen to the flight attendant who started this whole mess? Comment number 1. If you believe Jennifer Collins should face serious consequences for her discriminatory behavior. Or comment number 2 if you think she was just following what she thought were proper procedures. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're as outraged by this treatment as I am, and make sure to subscribe, because we're about to see justice served in ways you won't believe. But here's what nobody expected. While Marcus was fighting for his dignity in that terminal, phone calls were being made at the highest levels of corporate America that would change everything. What happens when one of the most powerful black executives in the country discovers his son has been humiliated because of his race? The answer will shock you. The emergency conference call convened at exactly 2:37 p.m. Eastern Time, bringing together the most senior executives of Atlantic Airways in what would later be described as the most consequential crisis management meeting in the company's 40-year history. CEO Patricia Hendricks, a Harvard MBA who had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency, stared at her computer screen in disbelief as she reviewed the preliminary reports flooding in from her staff. "Someone explained to me how we went from a routine customer service issue to trending on Twitter in less than 2 hours, Hendricks demanded, her voice carrying the icy edge that her subordinates had learned to fear. Chief Operating Officer James Morrison, no relation to Airport Supervisor Janet Morrison, cleared his throat nervously. "Patricia, it appears we're dealing with what our initial reports characterized as a fraudulent passenger. However, subsequent investigation has revealed that the passenger in question is Marcus Washington, son of William Washington from Washington Industries." The silence that followed was deafening. Every executive on the call understood the implications immediately. Washington Industries wasn't just another corporate customer. They represented over $12 million in annual travel revenue, employed thousands of people, and wielded considerable political influence through William Washington's extensive network of relationships. Legal counsel David Chen, who had guided the airline through numerous discrimination settlements, spoke first. "Patricia, we need to assume this is going to become a major federal case. The passenger appears to have been targeted solely based on race. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence, and now it's spreading across social media platforms faster than we can monitor." Chief Marketing Officer Lisa Rodriguez had been tracking the online response in real time, watching helplessly as their brand reputation suffered blow after blow. The hashtags Atlantic Airways discrimination and Flying While Black are trending nationally. We're getting tagged in thousands of posts, and celebrity influencers are starting to pick up the story. Back at O'Hare, William Washington's Bentley pulled up to the terminal curb with the quiet authority that comes with decades of success. At 58 years old, William had built Washington Industries from a small construction company into a diversified empire spanning real estate, technology, and government contracting. His journey from the south side of Chicago to the highest levels of American business had been marked by both extraordinary achievement and constant navigation of racial barriers. William's legal counsel, Michael Davis, from the prestigious firm of Davis, Sterling and Associates, accompanied him into the terminal. Davis specialized in high-profile discrimination cases and had secured numerous multi-million-dollar settlements against corporations that had underestimated the costs of bias and prejudice. The transformation in airport staff behavior was immediate and dramatic. Morrison, who had spent the past hour treating Marcus like a potential criminal, suddenly became obsequiously apologetic when she recognized William Washington from newspaper photos and television interviews. "Mr. Washington, sir, I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding that may have occurred," Morrison stammered, her previous authority replaced by obvious nervousness. "We're conducting a full investigation into this incident, and I assure you that we take these matters very seriously." William's response was measured but unmistakably threatening. "Ms. Morrison, there appears to be no misunderstanding. My son was removed from his legitimately purchased first-class seat and subjected to humiliation based solely on the color of his skin. The only question now is what your airline intends to do about it." Marcus embraced his father, feeling a mixture of relief and renewed anger as he recounted the details of his treatment. William listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly stern as the full scope of the discrimination became clear. "Son, I want you to know that what happened to you today is completely unacceptable," William said, his voice carrying the quiet power that had made him one of America's most respected business leaders. "We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Davis began documenting everything, recording witness statements and collecting contact information from passengers who had observed the incident. Several travelers approached them, spontaneously, offering to provide testimony about what they had witnessed and expressing outrage at Marcus's treatment. Meanwhile, the airline's crisis management team was discovering the full extent of their exposure. Security footage from multiple cameras showed Marcus behaving with perfect courtesy throughout the encounter, while clearly revealing the discriminatory behavior of Collins and the excessive aggression of Bradley. Corporate Security Chief Robert Kim was reviewing the video evidence when he made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the executive team. "Patricia, you need to see this footage from the boarding gate. Our employee Jennifer Collins can be clearly heard making racially charged comments to other passengers after Mr. Washington was removed." The video showed Collins telling another flight attendant that she knew something was off the moment she saw him, and that people like that always try to game the system. Her words were captured clearly by the airport's audio surveillance system, providing undeniable evidence of racial bias. Public Relations Director Sandra Williams was fielding calls from major news outlets as the story gained national attention. CNN, NBC, and Fox News had all reached out for comment, while civil rights organizations were issuing statements condemning the airline's actions. "Patricia, we're getting calls from everyone," Williams reported during an emergency update call. "The NAACP is demanding an investigation. The Congressional Black Caucus is asking questions, and major civil rights attorneys are offering to represent Mr. Washington. This is becoming a national story." Stock prices for Atlantic Airways began declining as news of the discrimination incident spread throughout financial markets. Institutional investors, increasingly sensitive to ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, began expressing concerns about the company's diversity practices and potential legal liabilities. The airline's board of directors convened an emergency session as the full scope of the crisis became apparent. Board Chair Margaret Thompson, a veteran corporate director with experience managing major scandals, recognized that the company was facing an existential threat to its reputation and financial stability. "Patricia, I need you to understand that this incident has the potential to define our company for years to come," Thompson stated during a private call with the CEO. "We're not just dealing with a customer service problem. We're facing a potential federal discrimination case involving one of the most prominent Black families in America." Social media campaigns calling for boycotts of Atlantic Airways gained momentum throughout the afternoon. Hashtags like Tamer Boycott Atlantic Airways and Justice for Marcus were trending across multiple platforms, with celebrities, athletes, and politicians adding their voices to the growing chorus of condemnation. Professional athletes were particularly vocal in their support of Marcus, with several NBA and NFL players sharing their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Their posts reached millions of followers, amplifying the story far beyond its original scope and creating sustained pressure for accountability. The financial implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Corporate travel managers at major companies were receiving calls from employees questioning whether they should continue using Atlantic Airways for business travel. Several Fortune 500 companies quietly began reviewing their corporate travel policies and considering alternative carriers. Civil rights attorney Johnny Cochran Jr.'s former law partner, who had built a reputation as one of America's premier discrimination lawyers, reached out to Marcus through intermediaries, offering his services pro bono. The involvement of such high-profile legal talent signaled to industry observers that this case could result in landmark precedent and significant financial damages. Within hours, the incident had evolved from a simple customer service dispute into a full-blown corporate crisis with national implications. The airline's attempts to characterize the situation as a misunderstanding were crumbling under the weight of video evidence, witness testimony, and the growing media attention. Internal communications revealed that Collins had previously been the subject of complaints from minority passengers, but those complaints had been dismissed or inadequately investigated. Bradley's personnel file showed a pattern of aggressive behavior toward passengers of color, raising questions about the airline's hiring and training practices. The Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Enforcement and Proceedings began receiving formal complaints about the incident, triggering the possibility of federal investigation and sanctions. Such investigations could result in significant fines and ongoing federal oversight of the airline's operations. As the day wore on, it became increasingly clear that Atlantic Airways was facing the kind of crisis that could permanently alter its business prospects. The combination of clear evidence of discrimination, a high-profile victim, extensive media coverage, and growing public outrage created a perfect storm that would test every aspect of the company's crisis management capabilities. Senior executives realized they were no longer dealing with damage control, but with corporate survival. The decisions made in the next few hours would determine whether Atlantic Airways could recover from this incident or whether it would become a cautionary tale about the costs of institutional racism in corporate America. The internal investigation that Atlantic Airways launched moved with unprecedented speed and thoroughness, driven by the urgent recognition that the company's survival might depend on demonstrating immediate accountability. Chief Human Resources Officer Margaret Foster personally took charge of the employee review process, working through the night to compile comprehensive files on everyone involved in the incident. What Foster discovered painted a disturbing picture of systemic problems that extended far beyond a single discriminatory incident. Jennifer Collins's personnel file revealed a troubling pattern that had been overlooked or minimized by previous supervisors. Over her 15-year career, Collins had been the subject of 17 formal complaints from passengers, with an overwhelmingly disproportionate number involving travelers of color. The complaints painted a consistent picture: Collins questioning the legitimacy of minority passengers' tickets, making assumptions about their ability to afford premium services, and treating them with suspicion and hostility that white passengers never experienced. Previous investigations had been superficial, often accepting Collins's explanations without serious scrutiny or meaningful follow-up. Security officer Tom Bradley's record was even more damning. His 12-year career included multiple incidents of excessive force, racial profiling, and inappropriate behavior toward passengers of different ethnicities. Complaint records showed that Bradley consistently escalated situations involving minority passengers while demonstrating restraint with white travelers in similar circumstances. Most shocking was the discovery of Bradley's social media activity, which included posts expressing support for white supremacist organizations and sharing memes that mocked civil rights movements. His Facebook profile contained photos from rallies associated with extremist groups, raising serious questions about how such an individual had maintained security clearance at a major airport. Airport supervisor Janet Morrison's email history provided the most damning evidence of institutional bias. Her correspondence with colleagues included numerous references to problem passengers that consistently targeted people of color. She had used coded language to describe minority travelers as suspicious, difficult, or not our typical clientele. The video evidence from multiple security cameras provided an unshakable foundation for understanding exactly what had occurred. The footage showed Marcus approaching the gate with perfect courtesy, presenting his boarding pass politely, and maintaining his composure even as the situation escalated around him. More importantly, the cameras captured Collins's body language and facial expressions, clearly showing her negative reaction to Marcus from the moment she saw him. The footage revealed that she had made her decision to challenge his presence before examining his ticket, suggesting that racial bias rather than any legitimate concern had driven her behavior. Audio surveillance systems had recorded conversations that airline executives found mortifying. Collins could be heard telling another flight attendant that she could always spot the ones trying to scam their way into first class, and that some people just don't understand that certain areas aren't meant for them. The investigation also revealed broader systemic issues within the airline's customer service training programs. Diversity and inclusion training was minimal, outdated, and clearly ineffective. Employee evaluations failed to identify or address racial bias, and complaint resolution procedures were inadequate for recognizing patterns of discriminatory behavior. Marcus's meeting with news reporters was carefully orchestrated by his father's public relations team to maximize impact while maintaining the dignity that had characterized his response throughout the ordeal. Seated in the elegant conference room of Washington Industries' Chicago headquarters, Marcus spoke with the measured authority of someone who had been raised to handle adversity with grace. "I want to be clear about what happened yesterday," Marcus began, looking directly into the cameras. "I was removed from my legitimately purchased first-class seat not because of any behavior on my part, but because a flight attendant made assumptions about me based on the color of my skin." His account was detailed, precise, and devastating in its calm recitation of facts. Marcus described each interaction, each escalation, and each moment when airline staff chose to assume the worst about him while giving every benefit of the doubt to a white passenger who had no legitimate claim to his seat. "This wasn't about a computer error or a seating mix-up," Marcus continued. "This was about the assumption that someone who looks like me doesn't belong in first class, combined with a system that automatically believed I was lying when I tried to prove my legitimacy." William Washington's press conference was held simultaneously at the company's headquarters, where he spoke to a room packed with reporters from national and international media outlets. His statement was brief but powerfully delivered, carrying the weight of decades of business success and community leadership. "My son experienced yesterday what millions of African Americans face regularly in this country: the assumption that we are somehow less legitimate, less deserving, and less truthful than our white counterparts," William stated. "What makes this particularly egregious is that it occurred despite clear documentation, witness testimony, and video evidence of his appropriate behavior." The press conference announcement that Washington Industries was considering legal action sent Atlantic's Airways stock into freefall. The company's market capitalization dropped by over $2 billion in a single trading session as investors recognized the potential financial exposure from discrimination lawsuits and the broader reputational damage. Social media campaigns had evolved beyond simple hashtags into organized movements, calling for comprehensive changes in the airline industry. The Flying While Black campaign generated millions of posts sharing similar experiences, creating a repository of discrimination incidents that revealed the scope of the problem across multiple carriers. Celebrity endorsements amplified the story's reach exponentially. Oprah Winfrey shared Marcus's story with her 43 million Twitter followers, describing it as a painful reminder that success and dignity don't protect us from the poison of racial bias. Her post was retweeted over 200,000 times within hours. Professional athletes use their platforms to share their own experiences of travel discrimination, with several NBA and NFL stars describing similar incidents involving assumptions about their legitimacy, ability to afford premium services, or right to occupy certain spaces. The story gained international attention when the BBC, Al Jazeera, and other global news organizations began covering it as an example of persistent racism in American institutions. The international perspective highlighted how such incidents damaged America's reputation for equality and justice on the world stage. Congressional representatives began calling for hearings on discrimination in air travel, with several members of the Congressional Black Caucus announcing intentions to investigate patterns of bias across the airline industry. The involvement of federal legislators elevated the incident from a corporate crisis to a matter of national policy concern. The NAACP and other civil rights organizations filed formal complaints with the Department of Transportation, triggering federal investigations that could result in significant fines, ongoing oversight, and mandatory changes to industry practices. Legal experts analyzing the case noted that the combination of clear evidence, high-profile victims, and extensive documentation created conditions for a landmark settlement that could establish new precedents for discrimination cases in the transportation industry. The airline's attempts at damage control were failing spectacularly, as each new revelation made their initial response appear increasingly inadequate. Corporate communications that had characterized the incident as a misunderstanding were now being mocked across social media platforms as evidence of institutional tone deafness. Internal documents leaked to media outlets revealed that senior executives had been aware of patterns of discriminatory behavior, but had failed to take meaningful action. Email chains showed discussions about problem passengers that consistently targeted minority travelers, suggesting that discrimination was embedded in the company's operational culture. The truth that emerged painted a picture of an incident that was both shocking in its individual cruelty and representative of broader systemic problems. Marcus Washington had not been the victim of an isolated mistake, but rather the target of institutional bias that permeated every level of the airline's operations. As evidence mounted and public pressure intensified, it became clear that Atlantic Airways was facing a reckoning that would extend far beyond financial settlements or personnel changes. The company was confronting the fundamental question of whether it could survive the exposure of its discriminatory practices and rebuild trust with the traveling public. The emergency board meeting convened at Atlantic Airways headquarters at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, less than 18 hours after the incident that would forever change the company's trajectory. Board Chair Margaret Thompson had called the session after receiving calls throughout the night from major shareholders, institutional investors, and corporate partners expressing alarm about the escalating crisis. CEO Patricia Hendricks entered the boardroom knowing that her 23-year career with the company hung in the balance. The presentation she was about to deliver would either demonstrate decisive leadership in a moment of crisis or mark the beginning of the end of her tenure at the helm of Atlantic Airways. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing the most serious crisis in our company's history, Hendricks began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the situation. The incident involving Marcus Washington has exposed systemic failures in our organization that require immediate and comprehensive action. The evidence presented to the board was devastating in its clarity and scope. Video footage, audio recordings, personnel files, and witness statements painted an unambiguous picture of racial discrimination that had been allowed to fester within the company's culture for years. Board member Robert Chen, a former federal judge with extensive experience in civil rights law, spoke first after reviewing the evidence. Patricia, this isn't just about one incident or even one employee. We're looking at a pattern of discriminatory behavior that suggests institutional failure at multiple levels of the organization. The decision to terminate Jennifer Collins, Tom Bradley, and Janet Morrison was unanimous and immediate. The board recognized that anything less than swift and decisive action would be interpreted as tolerance for discrimination and would exponentially increase the company's legal and financial exposure. Collins received the termination call at 7:15 a.m. while preparing for what she had assumed would be a normal workday. The conversation was brief and final. Effective immediately, she was terminated for cause due to discriminatory behavior toward passengers, with forfeiture of all benefits and no possibility of rehire within the industry. Bradley's termination was delivered by Airport Security Management, with immediate revocation of his security clearance and escort from the premises. His involvement with extremist organizations had been discovered during the overnight investigation, creating additional liability issues that extended beyond the Washington incident. Morrison's termination included a formal notation in her permanent record about discriminatory practices, effectively ending her career in the airline industry. Her email communications had provided undeniable evidence of racial bias that would make her unemployable in any customer-facing role within transportation or hospitality sectors. The announcement of the terminations was accompanied by a comprehensive statement from Atlantic Airways, acknowledging that discrimination had occurred and accepting full responsibility for the failures that had allowed it to happen. The statement represented a dramatic departure from typical corporate responses to discrimination allegations. Atlantic Airways acknowledges that Marcus Washington was subjected to unacceptable treatment based on racial bias. The statement read, "We take full responsibility for the actions of our employees and the systemic failures that allowed this discrimination to occur. We are committed to implementing immediate and lasting changes to ensure this never happens again." The company's offer to Marcus included not only financial compensation, but also lifetime first-class status, formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a commitment to implementing diversity and inclusion programs developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. Criminal charges against Bradley were being considered by federal prosecutors, who were investigating whether his actions constituted federal civil rights violations. The involvement of the FBI's Civil Rights Division elevated the case beyond corporate accountability to potential criminal liability for individual actors. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed within days of the incident, as other passengers who had experienced similar discrimination came forward with their own accounts. Law firms specializing in civil rights cases recognized the opportunity to use the Washington incident as a foundation for broader challenges to industry practices. The Department of Transportation's investigation moved with unusual speed, driven by the high-profile nature of the case and the clear evidence of discrimination. Federal investigators interviewed dozens of airline employees, reviewed thousands of internal documents, and analyzed patterns of passenger complaints across the company's operations. Congressional hearings were scheduled to examine discrimination in air travel, with Marcus and William Washington invited to testify about their experiences and recommendations for industry reform. The hearings would provide a national platform for discussing systemic racism in transportation and other service industries. Civil rights organizations seized the moment to push for broader changes across the airline industry. The NAACP announced a comprehensive campaign to monitor and report discrimination incidents, while other groups called for federal legislation strengthening passenger rights protections. Corporate sponsors began expressing concerns about their relationships with Atlantic Airways, with several major companies quietly reviewing their partnerships and travel policies. The potential loss of corporate relationships represented millions of dollars in additional revenue at risk. Employee unions initially attempted to defend their members, but quickly distanced themselves from the discriminatory actions as evidence mounted. Union leadership recognized that supporting obvious discrimination would undermine their credibility and damage relationships with minority members. The airline's commitment to mandatory bias training for all employees was announced alongside the hiring of diversity consultants to overhaul the company's corporate culture. These measures were seen as necessary first steps toward rebuilding trust and preventing future incidents. Marcus's decision to establish a scholarship fund for minority students studying aviation and hospitality was announced during a press conference at Washington Industries headquarters. The fund, initially capitalized at $5 million, would support students pursuing careers in industries where they remained underrepresented. Legal settlements were reaching unprecedented levels, As the full scope of the airline's liability became clear, insurance companies were expressing concerns about coverage limits, while legal experts predicted that total settlements could exceed $100 million. Now here's what I want to know from all of you watching. Do you think these terminations were enough, or should there be criminal charges filed against everyone involved? Comment number 1 if you believe Jennifer Collins, Tom Bradley, and Janet Morrison should face criminal prosecution for their discriminatory actions. Comment number 2 if you think losing their jobs is sufficient punishment. Hit that like button if you're satisfied to see swift justice being served, and make sure you subscribe because we're about to see how this case changes an entire industry. But here's what's really incredible. While these firings were making headlines, something even bigger was happening behind the scenes. Marcus Washington wasn't just seeking personal justice. He was about to launch a movement that would transform how airlines treat passengers of color forever. What happens next will restore your faith in the power of standing up for what's right. The termination announcement sent shockwaves throughout the airline industry as competitors scrambled to review their own policies and practices before similar incidents could expose them to public scrutiny and legal liability. Within 48 hours of Atlantic Airways' dramatic response, major carriers across the country were conducting internal audits of passenger complaint records, employee training programs, and discrimination incident reports. Delta Airlines CEO Sarah Mitchell convened an emergency executive meeting to review the company's diversity and inclusion protocols. "I want every passenger complaint from the past 5 years analyzed for patterns of racial bias," she instructed her team. "If we have employees engaging in discriminatory behavior, I want to know about it before it becomes a national scandal." United Airlines implemented immediate changes to their complaint resolution procedures, establishing a new department specifically focused on investigating discrimination allegations. The company recognized that proactive measures were essential to avoid becoming the next target of civil rights campaigns and federal investigations. American Airlines announced a comprehensive review of their customer service training programs, partnering with the Southern Poverty Law Center to develop new protocols for preventing discrimination and handling bias incidents. The partnership was seen as an industry-leading approach to addressing systemic problems. The Aviation Industry Association issued guidelines for member airlines regarding discrimination prevention, passenger rights protection, and crisis management. The guidelines represented an acknowledgement that the Washington incident had exposed problems that extended throughout the industry rather than being isolated to a single carrier. Federal Aviation Administration officials began developing new regulations that would require airlines to report discrimination incidents and implement standardized anti-bias training programs. The regulatory response represented the most significant expansion of passenger rights protections in decades. Marcus Washington's role as a spokesperson for travel equality evolved rapidly as he received invitations to address industry conferences, university forums, and civil rights gatherings. His articulate and dignified response to discrimination had made him a powerful voice for change across multiple sectors. "What happened to me represents the experiences of countless travelers who don't have the resources, connections, or platform to demand accountability," Marcus stated during a keynote address at the National Urban League Convention. "We have an opportunity to transform not just the airline industry, but how all service industries treat people of color." The documentary, Flying While Black: The Marcus Washington Story, entered production within weeks of the incident, with Academy Award-winning director Ava DuVernay signing on to chronicle both the specific incident and the broader context of travel discrimination in America. Educational institutions began incorporating the Washington case into their business ethics curricula, using it as an example of how institutional bias can create massive corporate liability and reputational damage. Harvard Business School developed a comprehensive case study that would be used in MBA programs nationwide. The financial impact on Atlantic Airways continued to mount as corporate customers canceled contracts and individual passengers chose alternative carriers. Revenue projections showed potential losses exceeding $500 million over the following 12 months, making it one of the most expensive discrimination incidents in corporate history. Marcus's nonprofit organization, the Equal Travel Initiative, launched with backing from major corporations, civil rights organizations, and individual donors who had been inspired by his response to discrimination. The organization's mission included monitoring travel discrimination, supporting victims, and advocating for policy changes. The initiative's first major project was the creation of a national database for reporting travel discrimination incidents, allowing passengers to document their experiences and identify patterns of bias across different carriers and locations. Within 6 months, the database contained over 10,000 reported incidents. Federal legislation known as the Passenger Equality Act was introduced in Congress, requiring airlines to implement specific anti-discrimination measures and establishing penalties for carriers that failed to address bias incidents appropriately. The legislation had bipartisan support and was expected to pass with overwhelming majorities. International attention continued to focus on the case as foreign media outlets used it to examine broader patterns of racism in American institutions. The global coverage highlighted how discrimination incidents damaged America's international reputation and soft power influence. Civil rights organizations leveraged the momentum from the Washington case to launch broader campaigns against discrimination in hospitality, retail, and other service industries. The incident had become a catalyst for examining bias across multiple sectors of the economy. Corporate diversity consulting became a rapidly growing industry as companies sought to avoid becoming the next Atlantic Airways. Firms specializing in bias training, discrimination prevention, and inclusive culture development saw explosive growth in demand for their services. Legal precedents established through the Washington case began influencing other discrimination lawsuits, with attorneys citing the Atlantic Airways settlement as a benchmark for damages in similar cases. The legal framework created new opportunities for discrimination victims to seek meaningful redress. Marcus's marriage to longtime girlfriend Jessica Chen, a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights cases, was celebrated as a union of two individuals committed to fighting discrimination and promoting equality. Their combined influence amplified both of their advocacy efforts. The couple's establishment of the Washington Chen Foundation created a permanent institutional commitment to combating discrimination across multiple sectors. The foundation's initial endowment of $50 million supported legal aid, education programs, and policy advocacy initiatives. Annual conferences on transportation equality began drawing thousands of industry professionals, civil rights advocates, and academic researchers. The conferences, inspired by Marcus's experience, became premier forums for discussing discrimination prevention and promoting inclusive practices. Stock market analysts began incorporating diversity and inclusion metrics into their evaluations of transportation and hospitality companies, recognizing that discriminatory practices represented significant financial risks that could affect long-term profitability and sustainability. The incident's impact on popular culture included references in television shows, movies, and music that highlighted ongoing struggles against racism in everyday situations. The Washington case became shorthand for the persistence of bias in supposedly progressive industries. Employee advocacy groups within major corporations began pushing for stronger anti-discrimination policies and better protection for whistleblowers who reported bias incidents. The Washington case demonstrated how individual courage could spark institutional change. Academic research into travel discrimination expanded significantly as scholars recognized the need for comprehensive data about bias in transportation systems. Universities established research centers focused on studying and addressing discrimination in various service industries. The case influenced international discussions about racism and discrimination, with the United Nations Human Rights Council citing it as an example of persistent racial bias in developed nations. The global attention added diplomatic pressure for addressing systemic discrimination. Technology companies developed apps and platforms designed to report and track discrimination incidents, creating new tools for documenting bias and holding institutions accountable. These technological solutions emerged directly from recognition of problems highlighted by the Washington case. The transformation of Atlantic Airways became a case study in corporate crisis management and cultural change, demonstrating both the massive costs of discrimination and the potential for organizations to rebuild trust through genuine accountability and reform efforts. 1 year after the incident that changed his life, Marcus Washington stood at the podium of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, delivering the keynote address for the annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. The irony was not lost on him that he had become a civil rights advocate, not through planning or ambition, but through an experience of discrimination that could have easily remained a private humiliation. 12 months ago, I thought civil rights was something that happened in history books, Marcus told the assembled crowd of activists, business leaders, and community members. I believed that my education, my family's success, and my own achievements would protect me from the kind of discrimination that previous generations had faced. I was wrong, but that wrongness became the foundation for something much more important than personal protection. The transformation in Marcus's perspective was evident to everyone who knew him. Friends and colleagues noted that the quiet confidence he had always possessed had evolved into a passionate commitment to justice that energized everyone around him. His experience with discrimination had awakened a sense of purpose that he hadn't known was missing from his life. Atlantic Airways had undergone equally dramatic changes, becoming an industry leader in diversity and inclusion practices through a comprehensive transformation that touched every aspect of the company's operations. CEO Patricia Hendricks, who had initially faced calls for her resignation, had instead led one of the most successful corporate culture overhauls in business history. The airline's new customer satisfaction ratings among minority passengers showed remarkable improvement, with discrimination complaints dropping by 93% compared to pre-incident levels. The company's Net Promoter Score among passengers of color had gone from among the worst in the industry to the highest, demonstrating that genuine change was possible when organizations committed to meaningful reform. New leadership positions, created specifically for diversity and inclusion, oversight had been filled by respected civil rights advocates and experienced corporate executives who brought both moral authority and practical expertise to their roles. These positions carried real power within the organization, with direct reporting relationships to the CEO and board of directors. Chief Diversity Officer, Dr. Angela Roberts, former head of the NAACP's Corporate Diversity Initiative, had implemented training programs that became the gold standard for the airline industry. Her approach combined historical education about discrimination with practical tools for recognizing and preventing bias in daily operations. The Washington incident was a crisis that revealed who we really were as an organization, Dr. Roberts explained during a conference presentation. But crisis can be catalyst, and we chose to use that moment to become who we needed to be. The changes we've implemented aren't just about avoiding lawsuits. They're about creating an environment where every passenger feels valued and respected. The airline's partnership with civil rights organizations had evolved beyond symbolic gestures to substantive collaboration on policy development, employee training, and community outreach. These partnerships provided ongoing accountability and ensured that diversity efforts remained authentic rather than merely performative. Marcus received recognition from numerous humanitarian and civil rights organizations, including the NAACP Image Award for Courage and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's Drum Major for Justice Award. Each honor reinforced his commitment to using his platform for meaningful social change. The Equal Travel Initiative had grown from a single-issue advocacy organization into a comprehensive civil rights group addressing discrimination across multiple industries. With offices in 12 cities and a staff of over 100, the organization had become a major force for promoting equality in service industries. Former colleagues and friends expressed admiration for how Marcus had transformed a painful personal experience into a platform for helping others. His response to discrimination had inspired many of them to examine their own assumptions and become more active in promoting diversity and inclusion within their own organizations. Marcus could have taken a settlement, stayed quiet, and moved on with his life, said his Harvard Business School classmate Jennifer Park. Instead, he turned his pain into purpose and created something that will benefit countless people who face similar discrimination. That takes a special kind of courage and character. The documentary about Marcus's experience premiered at the Sundance Film Festival to critical acclaim and widespread media attention. The film's examination of travel discrimination resonated with audiences across racial and socioeconomic lines, sparking conversations about bias in everyday interactions. Marcus's book, Dignity in the Face of Discrimination: A Journey from Humiliation to Hope, became a bestseller and required reading in diversity training programs across multiple industries. The book combined personal narrative with practical guidance for organizations seeking to create more inclusive environments. Educational scholarships funded by various settlements and initiatives had supported over 200 minority students pursuing careers in aviation, hospitality, and customer service fields. Many of these students credited Marcus's example with inspiring them to enter industries where they could make positive changes. The Marcus Washington Fellowship Program, established at several universities, provided funding and mentorship for students conducting research on discrimination and developing solutions to bias in various sectors. Fellowship recipients were already producing innovative approaches to promoting equality and inclusion. Marcus and Jessica's first child, William Marcus Washington, was born on the first anniversary of the airline incident. The timing seemed symbolic to friends and family, representing hope and renewal emerging from experiences of injustice and discrimination. "I want William to grow up in a world where he's judged by his character and capabilities rather than the color of his skin," Marcus said during an interview with CNN. "But I also want him to understand that fighting for justice isn't optional when you have the privilege and platform to make a difference." The Washington Chen Foundation had funded legal aid clinics, educational programs, and policy advocacy initiatives across the country. Their comprehensive approach to combating discrimination addressed both individual cases and systemic problems that perpetuated bias and inequality. Annual reports from the foundation showed measurable progress in reducing discrimination complaints across industries where they had focused their efforts. The combination of legal pressure, public awareness campaigns, and corporate partnerships was producing tangible results in protecting civil rights. The couple's influence extended beyond civil rights advocacy to broader social justice issues, including criminal justice reform, educational equality, and economic opportunity. Their foundation had become a significant force for progressive change across multiple policy areas. Technology initiatives funded by the foundation had created new tools for reporting and documenting discrimination, making it easier for victims to seek justice and for organizations to identify and address bias in their operations. These technological solutions were being adopted by civil rights organizations nationwide. Marcus's speaking engagements had evolved from reactive responses to discrimination into proactive efforts to prevent bias and promote inclusion. His presentations at corporate conferences, university forums, and community events consistently received standing ovations and generated lasting changes in organizational policies. The transformation of Marcus's life demonstrated how individuals could use traumatic experiences as catalysts for positive change that extended far beyond their personal circumstances. His journey from victim to advocate inspired countless others to find meaning and purpose in their own struggles with discrimination and injustice. 5 years after the incident that changed his life forever, Marcus Washington stood in the boardroom of Washington Consulting Group, the diversity and inclusion firm he had built from a single traumatic experience into one of the most respected organizations in corporate America. The walls were lined with awards, testimonials, and photographs documenting the extraordinary journey from airline passenger to civil rights leader. The company's client list read like a Fortune 500 directory, with major corporations seeking Marcus's expertise to avoid the kind of discrimination incidents that had destroyed careers and cost billions of dollars in settlements and lost revenue. His unique perspective as both victim and advocate gave him credibility that no academic study or consultant report could match. "When I was escorted off that plane 5 years ago, I never imagined it would lead to this," Marcus reflected during an interview with Forbes magazine. "But sometimes our worst moments become the foundation for our greatest contributions." That humiliation became the catalyst for changes that have protected thousands of people from similar experiences. The landmark legal precedent established through the Atlantic Airways case had fundamentally altered how discrimination lawsuits were evaluated and settled throughout the transportation industry. Attorneys regularly cited the Washington settlement as the benchmark for damages in similar cases, creating new protections for discrimination victims nationwide. Atlantic Airways, now under completely new leadership, had become the gold standard for diversity and inclusion in the airline industry. The company's transformation was so complete that it regularly received awards for corporate social responsibility, and was studied by business schools as an example of successful crisis management and cultural change. The airline's stock price had not only recovered from its post-incident collapse, but had reached record highs as investors recognized that genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion created sustainable competitive advantages. The company's reputation for inclusive service had become a significant marketing asset. Marcus's nonprofit organization, now known simply as the Equal Initiative, had expanded its mission beyond travel discrimination to address bias across multiple service industries. With an annual budget exceeding $20 million and offices in 30 cities, the organization had become one of America's most influential civil rights groups. The initiative's discrimination reporting database contained over 100,000 documented incidents, creating the most comprehensive record of bias in service industries ever assembled. This data had been instrumental in developing targeted interventions and policy recommendations that were reducing discrimination rates across multiple sectors. Federal legislation inspired by the Washington case had resulted in the most significant expansion of civil rights protections since the 1960s. The Passenger Equality Act and related measures had created enforceable standards for preventing discrimination and meaningful penalties for organizations that failed to address bias. Educational scholarships and fellowship programs funded by various settlements and initiatives had supported over 1,000 minority students pursuing careers in industries where they remained underrepresented. Many of these graduates were now in leadership positions, creating lasting change from within organizations that had historically excluded people of color. The Marcus Washington Institute for Social Justice, established at Howard University, had become a premier research center for studying discrimination and developing evidence-based solutions to bias and inequality. The Institute's work influenced policy at local, state, and federal levels. International recognition of Marcus's work included invitations to address the United Nations Human Rights Council, the European Parliament, and similar forums where his experience with discrimination was used to illustrate broader patterns of bias that affected people worldwide. Annual conferences on equality and inclusion drew thousands of participants from across industries and around the world. These gatherings, which began as responses to the Washington incident, had evolved into premier forums for sharing best practices and developing new approaches to promoting diversity and inclusion. Corporate diversity consulting had become a multi-billion-dollar industry, largely driven by recognition that discriminatory practices represented unacceptable financial and reputational risks. The Washington case had demonstrated that the cost of bias far exceeded the investments required to prevent discrimination. Legal aid clinics funded by the Washington Chen Foundation had helped thousands of discrimination victims seek justice and compensation for their experiences. These clinics had recovered over $500 million in settlements and judgments, while also driving policy changes that prevented future incidents. Marcus's second book, Building Inclusive Organizations: Lessons from Crisis and Transformation, had become required reading in MBA programs and corporate training initiatives. The book's practical guidance for preventing discrimination and promoting inclusion was being implemented by organizations worldwide. The couple's 3 children were growing up in a household where civil rights advocacy was simply part of daily life. Their involvement in age-appropriate activism and community service was preparing them to continue their parents' work in whatever careers they eventually chose. Jessica Washington Chen had been appointed to the federal bench, where her expertise in civil rights law and commitment to justice were influencing legal precedents that would protect future generations from discrimination. Her appointment was seen as recognition of the family's contributions to advancing equality. Technology platforms developed with foundation support had revolutionized how discrimination was reported, documented, and addressed. These tools were being used by civil rights organizations, government agencies, and corporations to identify and eliminate bias in their operations. The impact on popular culture included movies, television shows, books, and music that explored themes of discrimination and resistance inspired by the Washington case. These cultural productions were reaching audiences who might never attend civil rights conferences, but needed to understand the persistence of bias in American society. Academic research programs focused on discrimination and inclusion had expanded dramatically, with universities establishing new departments and degree programs dedicated to studying and addressing bias. The Washington incident had helped legitimize this field of study and secure funding for comprehensive research. International exchanges and partnerships had spread awareness of American civil rights innovations to other countries facing their own struggles with discrimination and inequality. The Washington case had become a global symbol of how individual courage could spark institutional change. The transformation of American corporate culture could be measured in declining discrimination complaints, improved diversity metrics, and increased awareness of bias among employees and customers. While discrimination had not been eliminated, the changes initiated by the Washington case had created measurable progress toward equality. As Marcus prepared to board a flight for another speaking engagement, he reflected on how different the experience had become. Flight attendants and airport staff consistently treated him with genuine respect and professionalism, not because they recognized him, but because training programs and accountability measures had changed industry culture. The ultimate measure of our success isn't that I'm treated better because of who I am, Marcus had told an interviewer. It's that every passenger, regardless of their race or background, receives the dignity and respect that should be the standard for human interaction. The epilogue to Marcus's story was still being written, but its impact was already clear. Individual courage in the face of discrimination had sparked institutional change that protected countless others from similar experiences. The journey, from humiliation to hope, had created a legacy that would benefit future generations. Industry statistics showed that similar incidents had decreased by 83% since the Washington case, demonstrating that accountability and systemic change could produce measurable results in protecting civil rights. The combination of legal consequences, public pressure, and genuine organizational commitment had created lasting transformation. The story concluded not with Marcus's personal triumph, but with the recognition that his experience had become part of a larger movement toward equality and justice. His dignity in the face of discrimination had inspired others to stand up for their rights and demand the respect that every person deserved. Marcus Washington's extraordinary journey teaches us that dignity in the face of injustice can spark transformational change far beyond personal circumstances. When confronted with discrimination, maintaining composure while demanding accountability creates powerful momentum for systemic reform. His story demonstrates that individual courage, combined with proper documentation and strategic advocacy, can dismantle institutional barriers that have persisted for generations. The incident reveals how assumptions based on race continue to permeate professional environments, regardless of education or socioeconomic status. It shows that silence in the face of bias enables further discrimination, while speaking truth to power creates opportunities for meaningful progress. Marcus's response proves that victims of discrimination can choose to become agents of change rather than remaining powerless. Corporate accountability emerged only when public pressure, legal consequences, and financial impacts converged to demand action. This highlights the importance of transparency, witness testimony, and sustained advocacy in fighting institutional bias. The transformation of Atlantic Airways demonstrates that organizations can genuinely change when leadership commits to comprehensive reform rather than superficial adjustments. Most importantly, Marcus's legacy shows that our worst experiences often contain the seeds of our greatest contributions to society. By channeling personal pain into purpose, individuals can create lasting change that protects future generations from similar injustices and builds more equitable institutions. What would you have done in Marcus's position when faced with such blatant discrimination? Would you have quietly accepted the situation, or would you have stood your ground like Marcus did? Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us about any similar experiences you've witnessed or faced yourself. If this story of courage and transformation inspired you to believe in the power of standing up for justice, smash that like button right now. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because we bring you incredible true stories that prove ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Marcus's powerful message of hope and resilience. Tag a friend who inspires you to be brave in the face of adversity, because stories like this remind us that our individual actions can create ripple effects that transform entire industries. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from discrimination to triumph. Remember that your dignity is non-negotiable, your voice matters, and your courage to stand up for what's right can change the world in ways you never imagined. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll see you in the next video with another amazing story of justice prevailing over prejudice.